Hi guys, it's Victoria again here in McCullough House. Just like our last video, we are here in the front room of the cabin, but today, instead of focusing on the cabin itself, we're going to focus on one of the portraits here in the house and a famous Waco figure. If we come over to the wall, we have a portrait here of Mollie Adams. She was originally from Ohio. She was actually born in 1868. Some sources say 1870. But Mollie moved here when she was about 19 years old, and Mollie worked as a prostitute for her first year here in Waco. Now that might surprise some of our viewers who are watching this, but after the Civil War, there was a large uptick in legal prostitution districts right here in the United States, and Waco had one of those districts as well. Just about a block and a half over from the Caldwell family cabin and the McCullough family house, Waco had what we call the reservation. That was the name for the legal prostitution district here in the city. Mollie started working in that prostitution district as a girl in one of the houses. By the next year, by the time she was 20 years old, Mollie owned her own 3-room operation on the reservation. And just 3 years later, by 1893, that operation more than doubled to be running a 7-room house. Just 17 years later, in 1910, Mollie was running the largest and most proper house of, quote, ill repute here in Waco. Now, it might surprise some of you to hear that prostitution was legal in the later half of the 1800s, but a lot of the towns in the United States, especially in the South and in the West, where people were moving at the time, relied on these prostitution districts for funding. As a madam, Mollie would have had to have paid for a permit for her house and for each of the girls, as well as taxes every single year for the house itself and each girl working in the house. The girls each had to buy their own personal permit to operate as a prostitute and also paid taxes as well. So that generated a lot of money for the city of Waco here. Mollie had become so famous in town that once when she was in court for an incident that happened at her house, the prosecuting attorney kept asking where they kept the phone and why it had taken them so long to call for help. Eventually, when her answers were not satisfactory, the judge asked Mollie, just tell him where you keep the phone. And she turned to him and said, Judge, you should be able to tell him because you use it well enough when you're there. Now that's not something I would have the guts to say to a judge here in Waco, but that's the type of figure that Mollie was. She was very famous across town, and she generated a lot of money for this city. That prostitution district that we call the reservation shut down in 1917. The U.S. Army actually asked the city of Waco to close the reservation so that they could build Camp MacArthur here in Waco. The city realized that the Army camp would generate a lot more money than the prostitution district, and so while the reservation was formally shut down, that area of town still operated illegally as a prostitution district, which the police didn't mind so long as the peace was kept. Now that might surprise people that we have this portrait here of Mollie in our Caldwell family cabin. Just a tidbit about the portrait, Mollie paid over $500 for this portrait on one of her trips to New York. Now around that same time, just a few years earlier, when the Caldwells were looking to move to Texas, that's the same amount that Dr. Caldwell paid for this land. Now that just shows the amount of wealth that Mollie had on her. But Mollie is connected to this house because Dr. Caldwell was one of the very few doctors in town that would treat the girls on the reservation. And with legal prostitution districts, there were a lot of rules. The girls were not allowed to enter any other business in the city of Waco. The clerks had to come to their closed buggies to serve them. The girls had to attend church every single Sunday, and Mollie had to make sure that they were seen as proper despite their prostitution. So Dr. Caldwell was one of the very few doctors that would treat them. They had to make sure that the girls were healthy in order to have a permit. So that's how Mollie is connected to our little house here. It's also worth mentioning that Mr. McCullough, who built onto the Caldwell family cabin, was mayor of Waco when prostitution was legalized. So he did have a hand in that. While it might surprise us today, prostitution was legal in the United States for well over 50 years, and for towns like Waco, literally paved the way for cities in the South and the West. So that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in and hearing this little bit of spicy history. But we'll see you next time when we're back in the McCullough house. So stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next time.